Almost everyone has heard of the sword of Excalibur, a famous sword that was used to find the one true king. However, not many people know its precursor, its ancestor, the sword of my home state, Alabama. Now, the sword of Alabama was much smaller. As a matter of fact, it was made of wood. And it wasn't really one sword in particular. Each city had its own sword. And they had a test to find not the greatest king, but the greatest sorcerer, because the people in Alabama knew a sorcerer would be much more powerful than any king could ever hope to be. They devised a test. They took a tube fashioned out of wood and drilled some holes in the side. And they took a sword made from the best whittler in the town. And they would put the sword through the holes in the tube, thus blocking the passageway inside. And then they would ask people to get the cube to go through the sword. And whoever could do this would be the greatest sorcerer ever and would win the competition of sorcery, and they would become the state's sorcerer. Well, many people tried. They would put the cube into the sword, and they would try to cast a spell, and nothing would ever work. They'd end up having to dump the cube out the same way it went in. Until one day, a very powerful sorcerer came along, and he examined the tube, and he saw that the sword was very solid, and that it was through the holes. And he decided to try his test. He took the cube, put it inside. With a magical cast of the hand, he did something nobody else had. He got the cube to go right through that sword, that solid sword. Now, of course, the Alabamians immediately rejoiced, thinking they had found the greatest sorcerer of them all. Finally, someone who could pass the test. That wasn't until a second sorcerer came along. You see, he heard the news of this past test, and he thought he could one-up them. He examined the tube that had been left on the scene, and he took the Alabama sword and inserted it through, once again, creating a solid passageway that would be impassable by any type of cube. With onlookers gathered around, everyone in the city coming to see this sorcerer who claimed he was better than the first, he took the cube, put it in through the top of the tube, did his magical spell, and claimed that it worked. The onlookers were stunned, because clearly they had seen no cube fall. But the sorcerer said, no. You never stated the rules. You never said the cube had to go through the sword. You wanted to see something magical with the sword. And the sorcerer split the tube in half with his bare hands. And there, impaled on the very sword of Alabama, was the cube. The one cube impaled on the wooden sword. The inventors of the sword were shocked. They didn't know how it could be possible because they knew the sword was solid. But somehow, that sorcerer had managed what no other sorcerer could have dreamed of. Many people tried to replicate his feat. They would take the tube and put the sword through and attempt to try to get the block to go through the sword. But nobody ever succeeded quite like that one very special sorcerer. To this day, people have marveled over it, and to this day, Alabama celebrates their sorcerer who is long gone. So that's just a little history lesson about the sorcerer and the great state of Alabama.